Thanks to all who joined. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the Design at Barnard team for organizing. So as mentioned, my name is Anisa. I went to Barnard. I graduated in 2018. I studied art history with a concentration in visual arts and Africana studies. So this sort of intersection of like art and race is my interest. While I was at Barnard, I was the editor-in-chief of Hoot magazine for 2.5 years, which was a really gratifying and meaningful experience to be able to sort of mold this publication into something bigger and kind of think really expansively about how can digital media be used for a purpose other than what is the most obvious thing. And so that was really my introduction in creating something from start to finish with a team and being able to sort of ideate and think about, you know, how are we using the access that we have for the good of others. And so that sort of got me interested in digital media and digital publishing more broadly. Through, I guess, like professionally and like work stuff, I do a lot of writing and editing and content creation and content strategy, mostly in the art world and also with projects that sort of live digitally. So it is like, you know, there's a lot of things that are like directly related to this kind of interest that I do professionally as well as just for fun. So I think niche media matters because we see mass media and what's available, and oftentimes it is sort of presenting the interests. It's trying to like appeal to everybody. By appealing to everybody, it appeals to nobody. And it's, you know, it's like the interests of the people who have power, the people who have money. And so the value of niche media is that it's able to fill in those gaps and tell the stories that wouldn't be told in these sort of mass spaces. Also mentioned about a little over a year ago, I started my own publication called One Report. And I describe One Report as spiritually minded media for people of all beliefs and backgrounds. One Report is a space of learning and reflection for people regardless of what they believe in or where they're coming from. And it's in the last year has become this really beautiful space where we've had over 100 contributors from over 30 backgrounds who are writing for us and sharing stories that are often incredibly personal, incredibly intimate and vulnerable. And it really is such an honor that they trust us to read and publish these stories. Can everybody still hear me? It's just everyone's muted, so I'm like a nod. Okay, cool. Awesome. So I wanted to, just sort of talk about like, why does niche media matters? How do you create it? What is sort of the importance of creating spaces like this, and why do it online? I think for me, at least, I know that like I spend so much time on the internet anyway. So obviously like that's a great excuse. It's like if people are going to be online, you might as well like have them looking at something interesting. But it's also a really special place to build and grow and develop community. Because I'm sure many of us, we have friends who maybe people we haven't met before, people we haven't seen in a long time, but we connect with over social media or on the internet. And so there's a lot of sort of value in like the way that the dynamics of friendship and relationships are changing to sort of reflect how we are so used to these digital spaces now. Part of that also is like how these spaces are sort of designed to be community driven. And so then, you know, having platforms that are sort of community focused then feels really natural because we're kind of used to it. We're sort of in that habit at this point. So through One Report, that is really the emphasis. It's like, how are we creating community? How are we creating opportunities where people who might not know each other, you know, but they're still able to sort of connect with one another and collaborate on something and learn from one another. And as I mentioned, it's because the publication is about spirituality. It's about how people from different backgrounds address and consider, different topics as they relate to the soul or infinity or the divine or whatever you call it, it provides a really unique and interesting space, because it's not something that people are typically doing on the internet, because we are really concerned with depth. A little bit of, I guess, background on like why I started One Report. So I had been working as a writer, doing freelance writing, and I felt like a lot of the work that I was doing was super, like very, very superficial, and didn't have a lot of meaning and purpose behind it. And then I went to, in January of 2019, I went to a content retreat for a project that I was consulting on. And during that project, somebody was sort of talking about this like zine in the 90s that I was like kind of a similar model. And I just became like obsessed with the idea of having this like collaborative publication that was about spirituality. And so that idea just like burned in my brain, and I had to make it. And so that's where One Report was kind of born. But then obviously sort of transforming it for digital spaces. And I was also, I had been thinking about at the time how, you know, I would have these incredible conversations with friends and acquaintances and strangers about our, you know, the way that we approach different spiritual topics, whether it's prayer or even like mental health or how we grew up or family dynamics or culture or whatever it was. But I didn't see that kind of a conversation reflected in media. And I didn't know where to find it. And so I tried to like look a little bit, and I, you know, there's On Being, and there's the, you know, Oprah has all of her content that she does, but it's not quite, it's not like quite to my demographic. Like it's not for a young person who is like creative and interested in sort of learning from other places and sources. And so I, you know, kind of felt like, well, this is like an opportunity. And then looking more into kind of what's available, it was like a lot of sort of spiritual media is either on one side, like really preachy and specific to one belief and system, or it's totally removed from personal experience. It's completely theoretical and oftentimes trying to sell you something. And so, you know, all of these things that were springing up, I was like, well, I need to just make this thing. Like I need to figure out what might this look like, and how can I bring it into the world? So that's kind of how One Report came to be. The name of it also, the idea of it being, each issue is like one report on blank. And the idea of that is that the publication is not absolute, it's not authoritative. Each issue is truly just one report on a topic, and there are many other ways to look at it. There are many other ways to understand it, but this is one of them. Yeah, it's been really fun. I love it a lot. And in the spirit of One Report, I want to do a little check-in as a group. So we hosted a spring equinox event with an arts organization called For Freedoms. And during that event, we did this check-in with people, and it was really beautiful. So in this sort of spirit of collaboration and participation, I want to bring this activity to this group. So it's going to be, there's 6 questions. And I just ask that you answer in like at most 2 words, and we'll put the answers into the chat. So the first 3 questions, they're kind of paired, so like 3 and 3 related to each other. The first question is, how is your head? And that is, and wait, I'll like tell the questions and we can answer, then we can put them in the chat. The first question is, how is your head? What have you been thinking about? Second question, how is your heart? How have you been feeling? Third question, how are your feet? What are you feeling grounded in? So we can first go ahead and answer, how is your head? What have you been thinking about? So if everyone could just take a second, but also think about. And like in as few words as possible. Okay, we have time, art, creativity, certainty, longing, processing. Are there any other things? Give it like a second. Okay, so now we can ask, How is your heart? What are you feeling? Processing, grief, distracted, heavy, thankful, nervousness, stressed, sleepy. Yeah, real. Um, Affection, worried, tired, happy. And now, how are your feet? What are you feeling grounded in? So we have outdoors, art, family, home, writing, family, community, family, slow processes, my body, comforts, cooking. Beautiful. The next set of questions are kind of a little bit of a shift. The first question is, what do you want to leave behind? The next question is, what do you want to bring forward? And then the third question is, what do you need to develop to make that happen? Like sort of a quality in yourself you need to develop to make that happen. So the first question we can all answer now, what do you want to leave behind? When I say leave behind, it's like shed. Like, what do you want to sort of, so unnecessary comparison, fear of the unknown, insecurity, fear, procrastination, comparison, fear, a lot of fear. And then more procrastination too, yeah. And that one came in last, like somebody was procrastinating writing the answer even, maybe. I don't know. And then what do you want to bring forward? Strong communication, gratitude, work, life, service, balance, optimism, joy, energy, gratitude, contentment. Nice. And then the last question is, what do you need to develop in yourself in order to make this happen? Okay, be louder, gratitude, patience, trust, confidence, trust in others, secure voice, more hope, being able to prioritize, patience. Nice, a lot of patience. Let go of future. Nice. It's very interesting to see this connection between like feeling very like across the board. It was like a lot of people felt really grounded in family. A lot of people were feeling fear right now. There's this need for patience. And it's just very interesting to see how, you know, even at a time when we're all very disconnected from one another, how there are so many threads that cross over. And also like I don't know, most people on this chat, like even if we've sort of had a Zoom call before, haven't met. So it's just very interesting to see how like there are all these ways that we connect with one another. And I'm sure like we each come from such different backgrounds and such different contexts, but still there are all these powerful ways that we are connected. So I also want to bring up, like, if people have like questions or something that they want extra clarity on or focus or whatever, please bring that up. This is very flexible. So this is like your time as well. So I guess now we can kind of talk about like the nitty gritty of having a publication. What does it require? So One Report in the first year of its existence published on a pretty rigorous schedule where we did a publication every 19 days. And the reason for that is the the magazine followed the rhythm of the calendar used in the Baha'i faith. So I'm a Baha'i, and in the Baha'i faith, the calendar that we use consists of 19 months that are each 19 days long, and each of those 19 months is named after a spiritual quality, and so it felt very natural to mirror the rhythm of the publication with the rhythm of the calendar. I'm going to do a screen share and show. So you guys can see that now, right? Okay, cool. So these are all of our past issues. So we ended up creating 21 issues over the first year because we had 2 special issues, but you can see, so the way that we did it, where we had the names of the months, so splendor, glory, beauty, grandeur, light, words, perfection, names, might, will, knowledge, etc. And then kind of assigned certain more specific topics based on whatever that sort of word inspired. So on beauty, one report on beauty was about Blackness, one report on words, on prayer, on perfection, on mental health, on might, on relationships, on will, on death, on power, on indigeneity, on honor, on parenthood, on questions was like literally just about questions. So it was a really like rigorous first year of publishing. And the way it's like having that sort of structure was a way of moving it forward. Like it was like a thing where we knew, okay, every 19 days there's going to be this sort of turnover of this month and this word, and it pushes it forward, which was a really helpful structure to have. I think in starting any sort of project, like having kind of goals and set things in mind for me is really helpful, because it forces me to keep going. The other thing that's kind of reflected in that publishing structure is, the importance of establishing like, what are you trying to convey? Like, what is like the theme and the tone of what you're trying to do? And for one report, there really wasn't any sort of goal or expectation in terms of length or the kind of content that we were going to include. It was like, and I say we, I work now with a friend of mine who acts as like my assistant editor. So we wanted, you really use this as a service. So, our priority is to have this really, really broad range of topics to kind of push forward this idea, like sort of this goal of like being able to talk about many, many different things with people that we knew or we didn't know, kind of whatever turned up. And so having a quick publishing turnaround was a way for us to kind of include as many people as possible. Because that was the other thing about wanting to do it, where I was maybe like a year and a half ago was part of this group studying a document about social action. And one of the big themes in it was this shifting away from centering yourself on goals and outcomes and centering yourself instead on universal participation and building capacity. So if in thinking about this project, that was really the goal. It was like, how do we get people to come together, as many people as possible, and how do we use this as a process of building capacity, not just in ourselves to be able to do this, but also in our community to have these kinds of conversations. And I think when doing any kind of publication, it's important to have that kind of put that kind of goal setting in mind. It's like, what is the broader goal for why we're doing this? Like, what's the point? Is it just that if we want to have like a gardening magazine, is it just because like we really like flowers, or is it because we want to set up like a seed sharing network across, different ecological settings or whatever it is? And really understanding like how, there's the content, but then there's also like sort of the purpose behind it, and how centering yourself on the purpose behind the content can help sort of drive and motivate why it is that you're creating in the first place. And I think even like understanding like why a publication, like why is that the format, is another question that needs to be asked, because for the example of one report, a publication is a way of compiling a selection of thoughts and essays from people from different backgrounds in sort of one collective format, but for something else, maybe it is about, maybe it's like a video series or an Instagram page, or it's, you know, one big project that comes out in one single push instead of increments. So thinking about that sort of context in terms of like, what are the larger goals, stepping back from, you know, what it is that you're producing, but why is it that you're producing that? And sort of letting that lead whatever it is you're trying to do. Also important, I think, is setting expectations. So I talked about this a little bit in terms of sort of our expectations for each issue. So when I started it, I was like, I'm going to see what can happen with this. I'm going to do it for a year. I'm going to commit to that. I'm going to do it every 19 days on this schedule. But beyond that, I didn't have an expectation of what it would become. So it wasn't like every single issue needs to have 6 pieces or needs to have this kind of a balance of representation or whatever it was. It was just like every single issue is going to happen and we'll see how it goes. And there are some issues that have, you know, 10, 12 pieces and some issues that have 1 or 2. But that's okay, because it was like whatever the community needed or whatever they were able to offer, that's what the issue would become. And there was like a lot of effort for sure for the issues where there was pieces were lacking, like to try to get more. But oftentimes it just wasn't possible, whether, you know, people's schedules conflicted or whatever was going on. And just to sort of have that detachment was really important, because it was a very, very ambitious thing to do, a really ambitious pace to set for this project. But I think, you know, the value then of having, you know, having that kind of a like low expectation for the turnout was that there was very low pressure on my end when it would come to publish the issue. So like, no matter what happened, I was like so delighted with it. I was like, oh my God, we got this one like really, really vulnerable piece from somebody who was like, I am bearing my soul to you. And that's such an amazing feeling, you know. But we'd also had issues where there were like 7 people doing that, and it was like also amazing. So I think it was just something that, like, because there was that kind of low expectation of like, this can be whatever it is and whatever it needs to be, it made every single issue just so delightful. And I know working on Hoot, when I was at Barnard, like it was a similar thing where, you know, we did have an expectation of how many shoots we were doing. We knew like we had this many fashion shoots, this many beauty shoots. We were much more tight in terms of controlling how the content was being rolled out and distributed, but ultimately, like, I saw it as a learning opportunity for students. So like if a shoot was kind of, you know, average, well, we could do what we could in terms of editing it and laying out whatever, but like it's still a success because somebody is learning how to do that. Like somebody is entering this not knowing how to carry this out. They do it, they learn something, and that's a success. And I think, you know, one nice thing about digital projects too is that there's no page limit. Like you can, it's not like a setting where you have like, you know, your word count is super strict and you have this really, really hard limit because your budget doesn't allow for more than X many pages, which can be super, super limiting and sort of have a lot of extra pressure on it. But when you're doing something digitally, it's like, if you have one thing one week and 20 things the next week, like it can happen, it doesn't matter, which is really nice that there is that built-in flexibility. I see some questions. So how do I choose the themes? The themes are, again, going off that calendar. But then also, again, with the theme choice, it was about, a lot of it was thinking like, what do these ideas evoke? But also, who do we want to hear from? Because it's also like, you are your own audience. So if you're interested in something, that means you should make it. And it also, like, if you're not interested in something, then don't make it. I think there's often like a lot of pressure of like, oh, we have to cover this topic or something, and it's like you're sort of doing it begrudgingly. But if you're not interested in doing it, honestly, like, don't do it, because, you know, you're the reader, and if you don't want to read that, then how do you expect other people to want to? And then, who is the One Report community? So One Report is entirely community driven. Like, we are, except for one special issue that we did, like we don't pay people and we don't get paid. It's literally like a labor of love. And our community is made up of friends, acquaintances, and strangers who have somehow found out about us, maybe through my incessant posting. but they found out about us and decided this is cool and I want to check it out. So we've had, you know, like my mom wrote for the parenthood issue. And I've had, you know, very, very close friends of mine write for the publication. And then we'll also get, you know, somebody will, you know, we'll have someone write for it. And then a friend will message me and say, oh my God, I sent this to, you know, my sister's friend because I thought she'd be interested. And she just had an issue in the latest, or a piece in the latest issue. Like we'll get these stories back where like Maya, my assistant editor, and I are like looking at the contributor list and we're like, do you know this person? And we're both like, no. And we're like, oh, okay, cool. So it really is this very broad thing. And then also, it's also very deliberately diverse in terms of faith background. So that's very important to us, that we don't want any issue to be just representative of one experience. Because while we understand the publication, that it's not absolute, it's never going to be absolute, that's not the goal of it, that it's important that we can provide multiple perspectives. Because, you know, it's like we understand that like nobody has the answer. And that's really important. I think a lot of the way that Maya and I approach the publication is through how we understand our relationship with belief as Baha'is. So in the Baha'i faith, there's no clergy, there's no individual hierarchy. And there's this, one of the core teachings is the independent investigation of the truth. So the idea that, you know, how we understand truth and how we come to truth should really be through our own individual processes. And that's part of why, like, you know, it's like taking in all these experiences, taking in all of these angles and perspectives and beliefs and teachings is so paramount to what we do at One Report, because it is about like investigating truth, which on this kind of a level is kind of unknown. Like we can sort of try to put pieces together as individuals, but like ultimately, who can say what is the best way to pray, or who can say, you know, what the connection of like the soul of you and your partner is? Like, we don't know, but it's fun to explore and try it out together. I'm gonna look at my notes. So I think the other thing kind of related to community is, and this sort of question of figuring out the why, is why should people care, is really important. I think there's a lot of content out there that's very beautiful and very cool and seems incredibly aspirational. But I don't always, I think it's like, it's nice to follow some of those kinds of spaces sometimes, but my preference is to have something where people feel invited to participate. And that was kind of a big consideration when formulating sort of why should a community of people care about One Report and gather around it. Because we're not trying to be like, it's not trying to be like a cool project. It's not trying to be something that feels inaccessible and, you know, this, you know, sort of like leading in that kind of a sense. It's meant to be a space that is absolutely inviting, that you can lend your voice, you can contribute, you can participate. And I think that's also really important to consider when putting a publication together. I think if you're doing something that's like fashion and beauty or a product or whatever it is, that it makes more sense for it to go to that sort of an aspirational place. But for when you're talking about spirituality, when you're asking people for stories that are really, really personal, it's important that they feel like they can participate. So that's another sort of important thing when you're thinking about community-driven content, is like, how are we communicating that to our audience, and what do we want them to sort of walk away with? What do we want them to feel after they consume our content? So I want to make sure, I don't know if people have like questions, if we want to pause for a second. I can show I was going to show like an InDesign document and show a little bit behind the scenes of like how it comes together. I don't know if people are interested in that. Yeah, no, I don't know. Okay, I'll do it. So I can show our latest. Oh yeah, love InDesign. Me too. Share my screen. Cool. All right, so here is InDesign. I love it. This was the latest issue that we had. One report on loftiness about spiritual transition, this is an example of like a topic that I thought was really cool that I was interested in hearing about, was like stories of, like going from one faith to another, or losing faith, or becoming, more deepened in a spiritual practice. So I just think it's like very interesting, and it's not something that we often talk about. Like, to ask somebody like, why did you convert to this other religion? Or like, why aren't you religious anymore? Or why are you so much more religious than your parents? But it's cool to have a space where you get to like sort of subtly like poke at people to answer these questions. So I'm into it. So on loftiness, every issue starts with sort of this description of what one report is. And then we have like our credits, and we always start with like something that kind of evokes the spirit of the issue. I am a fan of having 3 fonts. I don't know, no one taught me any of this. Like this is like super instinctual. Like I just sort of figured it out. I had never used, I started using InDesign, I guess, when I was a graphic designer for my high school newspaper. So I learned like super, super, super basic InDesign stuff. But I didn't like lay out the entire thing. So I didn't like really do any kind of layout until I was running Hoot. And then that was like such a learning process. But in terms of design, like every issue cover is pretty similar. It's like a photo, and then it has like on whatever the name of the sort of overarching quality, and then the kind of description of the actual kind of like honed in topic. The nice thing about InDesign is that I like it because you can sort of do a lot with the photos. So I like to collage things, and you can see like in this orange box, this is the boundary of the photo. And then within can you see that? See that, how you can sort of like zoom in and zoom out on the actual image, and then it'll sort of like keep it within a space. I like to do that because I like to get a little funky with like doing sort of collagey things like this, which is very fun for me. And that's kind of what keeps One Report creative, I guess, is that from my end at least, is that I get to do the layout design, which I really love. And then we kind of keep it consistent in terms of like, the pieces in this font, in this sort of organization, and then the name of the writer, and then it goes into the piece. I am also a really big advocate for like simplifying things for yourself. So there are certain things that are like necessary to change. So like obviously you need to have like new pieces and new photos, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. And I even have like, sometimes if I'm laying out a piece and it's like it doesn't feel right, I'll open up an old issue and sort of see how I laid out that old issue and just mimic it. So there are certain things like, pulling an image across the fold and having it sort of not totally half and half, like that's something that I do a lot. Or like, sizing it into the margin, images into the margin, doing this sort of split thing. I do that a lot. I'll do this a lot where like I'll sort of have one image that I'll put on like 2 different spreads, but like kind of cut in different ways. So I think if you're like doing a publication, you're doing a project that is serial, like that there's many versions of it, it's helpful to come up with those kind of strategies and approaches where you're not, even though each one is new, you're not approaching it from a completely like new place every single time. That is very helpful. Like sort of give yourself rhythms, like create rhythms for yourself, so that it's not like as exhausting. And then also pretty key is for social media, I have like another doc that I will, these are like drafts. So you can see like, these things like don't even get published. But I'll create little pages that are sized for Instagram, and then I'll kind of pull from the issue and play around with like more layout stuff. So we posted that recently. And again, it's like, doesn't have to be super complicated. The other thing I'll say is that you do not need InDesign to do this. So like you can make this on Microsoft Word or Apple Pages. you can make the magazine on any of those formats too. Like you literally just, like you can lay images and text over each other on any of those programs. So having something like InDesign or having Adobe programs is absolutely not necessary to do something like this. And I know also you can do like facing pages, so that you can see like a spread of pages on the program. So yeah, definitely like big advocate, not overcomplicating things for yourself. In this context, like publishing every 19 days is complicated enough. So anything that I could do to make life easier was super important. And like not, yeah, like even like not overthinking every detail, like, I don't know, like every color of a title, I would just like sort of get the dropper tool and like pick a color on the opposing page or something. Like it doesn't have to be so complicated that you're like killing yourself over every detail. Because ultimately, like, you notice, but most people won't notice. And if you're creating beautiful content and if you're doing it out of love and out of like a service for whatever you feel is important, then people are gonna resonate with that. And that's ultimately like what matters more than making sure that like every single thing is as perfectly designed as possible. And you know, it's also like, I'm not a professional graphic designer. Like I do a lot of sort of scattered creative work, but like there isn't anywhere that's asking me to do graphic design. But you know, I think the value that I bring to a project like this is obviously like I have the skill, I know how to use the program, but it's like the interest more than anything. It's that, you know, I really want to have these long conversations with somebody about, you know, why did they make the decision that they made, or how is it that they came to feel the way that they feel about whatever their belief is. And it's that interest and that sort of passion in that way that is so unique in many different people, like whatever this thing is for you, that can drive a project forward. And that's more important than having a technical skill, because a technical skill you can learn. Like you can go, I do this all the time, like you just Google like how do I do whatever. Like the other day I Googled how do I put gradient in text on Photoshop, and I figured it out. But it's it's like sort of the drive to like keep going and keep doing it and keep trying, that is for whatever it is that you're focused on, that is what is unique. So definitely don't let sort of technical things prevent you from creating. Oh, my favorite fonts, and then have I printed? Okay,
Yeah,
so I'll talk about, yes, I'll talk about favorite fonts. I like, so our publication, One Report, is in Georgia, like the body text is in Georgia. The sort of blocky one is called Boomer Tantrum, and then the other one is the sort of byline font is called Deskimo, and I'll use the byline font for quotes a lot. I am a big fan of dafont.com, DAFONT.com. It's like where I get all my fonts. But I like a mix of like a serif, a sans serif, and then like something that's like a little bit of a twist, but not crazy. Oh, we can unmute. Yeah, people can unmute themselves. So yeah, those are font favorites. I also have a font that I started using recently, just like for fun stuff, not for One Report, called Albertus Medium. Big fan of that. That's been a game changer. How we printed. Okay, let me show you what we printed. If I was more prepared and professional, I would have this next to me, but that's okay. So we printed an issue called One Report on Freedom. So I mentioned that we did a spring equinox event with this organization called For Freedoms. They also had a conference in the end of February this year and commissioned this special issue from us, which was an incredible opportunity and so special. So this was like an amazing thing to be able to do, because that was one of my goals, is like in the year I want to print. And I didn't know how it was going to happen, but we did it. And it was funny, like in the summer, I was at my former boss's house for a dinner party, and somebody was asking, oh, what do you do? And I was like, yeah, I'm a writer and I work in the art world. And then she was like, tell him about One Report. Like, why are you not mentioning this? And I'm like, oh yeah, I always forget to like mention that it's like what I do because I don't get paid for it. She's like, that's even better. Like, talk about it. And then somebody asked me, oh, like, what is it? And I was like, oh, it's a publication, da da da. And they're like, do you print? And I said, no, it's just digital. And my former boss, who's obviously now a friend, she's so supportive and wonderful. She was like, don't say just digital, say it's digital. Like that, the fact that it's digital is amazing. Like it doesn't matter. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good point. And then I mentioned something. I was like, yeah, like I'm hoping to print something by the end of the year. And she's like, no, don't say hope. You will print it. So, you know, it's like even framing those things in your mind, and we did it. We printed. I texted her when it was confirmed, and she was like, oh my God, I'm crying. So also having people support you is amazing and really nice. But yeah, so one report on freedom. So this was created for the For Freedom's Congress, which is a conference that they hosted in February. And it coincided with a period in the Baha'i calendar called a Yamaha. You can see on the spine. I don't know if you can like read that well, but a Yamaha means days of Ha, and Ha is a concept of mysticism that stands for, it means like a sense of timelessness through the divine. So it's like sort of this, it's like these few days in the Baha'i calendar that don't fit into this formula of 19 months that are each 19 days long. And so they asked us to like create something sort of inspired by this idea of like freedom from like it's like a freedom from time and the limit of time, and this idea that like if you have extra time you should use it in service to others, basically. And so we did one report on freedom, about what freedom means to the soul, where is it lost, where is it found, and it was a really like beautiful way of like sharing one report with many people. And again, it's like all of our issues everything is online on issuu.com/one-report-mag. But it's like, you know, it's like the same, it's cool, it's like the same sort of formula, and you can see, so what I showed you before was one report on loftiness, but it's like, there's a lot of sort of similarities in terms of layout that I do across the board, just to sort of keep things a bit simpler for myself. Because again, it's like, you don't need to reinvent how you're laying out your publication. In fact, there should be similarities because it creates sort of a thread. So this is an example of like, I love to do these sort of like kind of collaged situations, and like this was one that I was doing like images that were like there was like a lot of coupling. So it's like 2 little things of ketchup, and then there's like 2 eggs, 2 trucks. So there's, you know, it's like visually there's like something, I think it's like kind of it's more like instinctual than formulaic, but like something that sort of binds the images, that they just like look nice together. But so yes, we print it. Then, how do people engage other than submitting? So we obviously have the magazine, which is like the touchstone thing that we did for the first year. But we also have our Instagram page, and I can show you the one report Instagram will be a screen share. So this is the Instagram. It is a lot of pages that are reformulated from the issues, but it's also just like images that are pulled from our photographers, like things that we included in past issues. So this is an example of like a quote that was in an issue and an image that was in that issue. And then this was like a collage that was included in the issue. So we'll sort of pull pages that were in the magazine and put them, like reformat them to Instagram. And sometimes on the Instagram, like we have these highlights where we've asked people questions, and we've like sort of engaged. So like have a highlight on death to talk about like people's relationship with death. And then like share some answers about like, you know, how do we think about it together, and sort of broadening that conversation and opening up that opportunity to have like sort of collaborative discussion about things that we don't usually talk about on Instagram, like how we feel about death. And then, yeah, reading the magazine is also wonderful. There's a lot of content. We've produced 21 issues, so there's like a lot of stuff that you can just take in. And then the other kind of fun thing, so obviously I've kind of talked about how it's existed for a year, and I made the goal of doing the issues in that kind of rhythm for 1 year. So now we're kind of switching away from that model now. So from the beginning, I really saw one report as like a project. And again, it's like this sort of this thing of like question of like, what do you want to convey? What do you want people to take away? And the first way that I understood that, because of my background, was to create a publication. But now Maya and I are exploring other models. So we are working on a couple of things to think about what are other ways that we can talk to people about, or like, and also get people to talk about spirituality. So stay tuned. The Instagram is like still very active and like sort of a very present place that we're doing that, but also, yeah, looking to sort of expand and really consider how can we get like more people to be sharing with each other. So yeah, Instagram is pretty big. So in terms of submissions, we do like calls for submissions. So we'll do that all on Instagram. We do have an email newsletter that's like kind of new, and they're a little bit few and far between, because we're kind of getting the hang of that. But and also it's like, is it necessary, if our audience is on Instagram, is it necessary to like bring in a new element that people are not already on? You know, these are like things to consider. So we do calls for submission on the Instagram, and it'll say like the upcoming issue is, you know, this one report on loftiness, on spiritual transition, for example, you know, and then I'll sort of ask some posing questions. So like, you know, it'll say like, oh, the loftiness one literally says, write about changing faiths, not changing faith, learning about new spiritual practices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll sort of have some questions that'll prompt a little bit more about what the issue is about. And that's how we do written submissions. And then for the visual submissions, we have done calls out for artists, but we also, for certain issues, will contact people whose work that we know. So for example, I should mention, the first issue that came out, One Report on Service, was like a pilot. It's very ugly. You can look at it. It's on Issuu. And each issue, each piece had like a different image source. So it was like somebody sent in a bunch of selfies, and there was like a collage of their selfies. Somebody did an illustration. Somebody like, there were like some photos from a few different people included. And it just looked super disjointed. Like it was the kind of thing where like, we're not producing images. We're just sort of asking for things to come to us. So we have no control over what those are going to be, how they're going to look. So that was a very quick learning where I realized like, this is not the way it should go. Like we should absolutely not have just like random things come in and like try to piece them together. So each issue is one image maker, maybe two. So we've had some issues where there's like two photographers, or there's like an illustrator and a photographer. But typically there's one image maker for each issue. And also somehow like that person will tie in with the theme. So for example, the image maker for On Freedom is also a Barnard grad, Caroline Wallace, who I worked with a lot on Hoot, and I knew that she had done these like really beautiful cross-country road trips. So all throughout, because For Freedoms as an organization, like they're interested in programming across the entire country, and the conference also was attendees from all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. I didn't want it to be grounded in one particular place. And so using Caroline's photos, it's like you have all these different topographies and all these different kinds of landscapes that, you know, kind of you can recognize as the US, but it's not like, oh, this is definitely all like East Coast, or this is all definitely West Coast, or, you know, whatever. So that was very important. And then we've had other instances where, for example, One Report on Honor on parenthood, it was, we had illustrations that were created for the issue by, oops, why isn't this working? Okay. That were by a mother and her twin daughters. So these like super cute illustrations, like that's just the cutest thing. Love it. So it's just the cutest. So yeah, it's like we'll have like one image maker, but then cater it to like whatever the issue theme is. Yeah. Any other questions? Has anyone like read One Report or?
And we do have one question. We have the question about, do you usually accept just written submissions, or do you also do calls for visual arts?
Right. So we sometimes do calls for visual arts, but we mostly do calls for written submissions. I think because we do one image maker per issue, we will occasionally we'll put out a call saying like, if we're looking for an illustrator, or if you're a photographer, get in touch with us. We can have you kind of in our minds, but it's less of like an open call. It's more like a sort of periodic thing. Any other questions?
Well, yeah, so we have a few minutes left. If anybody, the mics are open, so if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question out loud, you definitely can. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much, Anisa, for doing this presentation. It was so interesting, and I'm sure everybody appreciates and really liked learning about One Report and just like how to start a digital publication and even just the little things we went over with Adobe and everything. So I'm going to leave it up to everyone if you want to ask a question, and we'll probably end in about 5 minutes.
I'll add, like, you know, important to like stay super organized. If you're going to do something that like kind of continues on. So having like, I love Google Drive, but have like spreadsheets of everybody who's contributed to your publication and how they've contributed to you, where their submissions are, where their contributions are. Like, be super organized about that. Like, keep everything in very clear folders so you can go back and find stuff. I mean, you know, when we were starting out, like, we didn't have anything, so you can't like foresee what you have to plan for or organize. But at this point, having 21 issues, over 100 contributors, it's really helpful to know exactly, like, I can pull up a document and say, oh, this person wrote for this issue, this is the title of their piece. Or, you know, if we want to know, have we used this quote before, we have a document that'll show, like, you know, what quotes are in what issues. So depending on the needs of whatever it is that you're doing, just to be like to keep that data, because it's just really helpful in whatever you're doing. But also like work with love, like, because that's what matters ultimately, is like do something that you love. And I think it's helpful too when you like treat the people who are contributing and working with you through like sort of an approach of love. And I know that particularly for what we do, like, I feel so honored and humbled every single time somebody offers a submission, because it's such a testament to like how they've put trust in us. Because we have, like, there are really, really like heart-wrenching pieces. Like, there's a piece in our issue on mental health about somebody who grew up Catholic and had an eating disorder, and wrote about sort of the process of taking communion and how eating a carb in front of people was like such a stressful experience for her, which was something that I would have never thought of. Or a piece in the issue on death about someone whose twin died, whose twin was stillborn, and how she has always felt this like presence with her of her twin. Or you know, they're not always like sad and dark, but like just these like really, really intense, beautiful. Or somebody in the issue on prayer, like talking about the Lakota word for prayer and how understanding that word helps him understand sort of how expansive prayer can be. So it's just like a beautiful thing to see people enthusiastically offer like these gifts of their experiences and reflections. And that's like what I'm most grateful for in this whole project. Yeah. Ooh, my favorite piece I published. I think those are some favorites for sure. There's also on freedom is also, like, I have to say it's pretty amazing. There's a piece from someone I went to high school with who we weren't like very good friends, but we like kind of knew each other, and she reached out saying, hey, I want to write for your publication, and wrote about like discovering prayer through the process of her mother dying, which was like, what a thing to offer. Like, that's just amazing. Or there's another piece in the issue from somebody who grew up in Iran and talked about facing religious persecution there, and you know what it was like to not be able to practice her faith. Yeah, best way to get in touch with me, Instagram. I'm like always on there. So the One Report Instagram is just One Report Mag. And then you can also email One Report at onereportproject@gmail.com. Our contact info is on the back of all of our issues. You can also like reach out to me on Instagram. I'm Anisa Tav. Yeah, but like DMs are easy. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Anisa. And I'm sure that the everybody will say thank you as well. Yeah, and good luck, and we'll be looking out for the next issue of One Report.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you
all.
so
Thanks
much.
for tuning in. Yeah.